It began with silence, but the kind of silence that echoes louder than thunder. A royal couple sitting across from Oprah Winfrey, a world waiting for revelations, and a storm brewing far beyond the walls of that perfectly manicured garden. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's interview wasn't just another celebrity moment. It was an earthquake in the very foundation of the British monarchy, and every tremor was felt across the globe. But for one man, those tremors were fueled for a fire he had already been stoking. Piers Morgan. From the very moment Meghan spoke of the pain she endured, the lack of support, and her cries for help over mental health struggles, the world split into two. For millions, her words carried the weight of truth, of a woman suffocated by centuries-old traditions. But for Piers Morgan, it was something else entirely. To him, Meghan Markle was not a victim, she was a manipulator, a liar, someone who had carefully crafted a narrative to bring down an institution that had stood for hundreds of years, and he wasn't shy about saying it. The next morning, Good Morning Britain became ground zero. Millions tuned in, not just in Britain but across oceans, eager to hear the explosive take Piers would unleash. And he did not disappoint. With that sharp British accent, polished but laced with disdain, he looked straight into the camera and said, "I don't believe a word she says." Those 8 words lit a firestorm. 8 words that set social media ablaze, sparked debates in Parliament, and triggered over 58,000 complaints to Ofcom in the days that followed. But in that very moment, Piers felt untouchable. After all, controversy was his fuel, and attention was his oxygen. But what Piers did not know was that sitting just feet away from him, quietly waiting for his moment, was Alex Beresford. To most viewers, Alex was the calm weather presenter, the man who spoke about sunshine and rain with a smile. But today, he was something else. Today he was a storm that Piers could not forecast. The tension in the studio was thick, almost unbearable. Piers continued his monologue, dismissing Meghan's mental health claims, questioning Harry's loyalty, mocking the very idea that the royal family could be racist. Every word pushed the temperature higher, and every glance from Alex carried the weight of a man ready to explode, but holding it, waiting, biding his time. Outside of the studio, Britain was in chaos. The press churned out headline after headline. Meghan's supporters clashed with her critics, and every cafe, every pub, every living room hummed with one question: who was telling the truth? And while the nation debated, Piers dominated the screen, controlling the narrative, shaping public opinion with every cutting remark. He was winning, or so he thought. The beauty of live television is its unpredictability. You can plan the questions, rehearse the segments, and polish the transitions, but when real emotions ignite, the script becomes meaningless. As Piers ranted on, gesturing with his hands, raising his voice just enough to command dominance, the cameras captured something far more powerful: a flicker in Alex Beresford's eyes. It was the look of a man who had had enough. And then, with calm precision, Alex spoke. His tone was measured, respectful, but cutting like a blade. He reminded Piers that Meghan was entitled to her truth, that dismissing her pain wasn't just cruel, it was dangerous. He looked at him and said what millions were already thinking. "I understand that you don't like Meghan Markle. You've made it so clear a number of times. And I understand that you've got a personal relationship with Meghan, or had one, and she cut you off. But she's entitled to cut you off if she wants to. Has she said anything about you since she cut you off? I don't think she has, but yet you continue to trash her." The studio fell silent. For a brief moment you could almost hear the world pause. Piers Morgan, the man who prided himself on dominating every conversation, was suddenly being confronted live, on his own stage, by a colleague who had never before challenged him this way. The words hung in the air like a guillotine, and you could feel the shift instantly. The balance of power had changed. What Alex had done was more than just speak up. He had exposed the raw nerve that Piers tried so hard to cover. This wasn't about journalism, or free speech, or even the monarchy. This was about ego, a bruised ego. A man rejected by Meghan Markle years ago, now dressing up his bitterness as skepticism, and Alex called it out for what it was. The cameras zoomed in. Piers's face tightened, his eyes narrowed, and for the first time in a long time he looked vulnerable. Not because Alex shouted, he didn't. Not because Alex was disrespectful, he wasn't. But because Alex did the one thing no one had dared to do. He broke the illusion. And just like that, the stage was set for one of the most shocking walkouts in television history. The air inside the studio had turned electric. Viewers at home could feel it pulsing through their screens, a tension that no background music, no clever camera angle could soften. Alex Beresford had spoken, and his words cut through Piers Morgan's armor like a knife through glass. Calm, factual, unshaken, Alex had done the unthinkable. He had challenged the king on his throne, live on air, in front of millions. Piers leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, his fists curling just slightly on the table. He could hear the echo of Alex's words over and over again. "You've got a personal relationship with Meghan, and she cut you off." That line pierced deeper than anything else. For years, Piers had spoken about that one brief encounter with Meghan Markle, a meeting at a pub, drinks, shared, polite conversation, and then silence. Meghan never called back, never reconnected, never gave him the friendship he thought he had earned. And now, here was Alex, ripping open that wound in front of the nation. The control Piers so carefully crafted began to slip. His breathing quickened. His eyes darted across the desk. His posture shifted from dominance to discomfort. But Alex didn't stop. He pressed on, steady and composed. What we need to be careful about, Alex said, his tone unwavering, is how what you say resonates with people out there. She's spoken about her mental health. She's spoken about feeling suicidal. When you dismiss that, other people watching, people who might be struggling, hear it too. The words weren't just a critique, they were a mirror. Alex was forcing Piers to see the weight of his platform, the consequences of his words, and that, perhaps more than anything, infuriated him. For Piers, his opinions were his empire, his lifeline, his power. To question them was to question him. The cameras caught every twitch, every flicker of anger as Piers tried to interject, but Alex's voice carried on, calm yet firm. I think we all need to take a step back. You can have your dislike of Meghan, that's your opinion. But this constant trashing, day after day, it's not healthy, it's not right. For the audience, it was a moment of clarity. Here was a man measured, articulate, saying what they had been shouting on social media for days. And here was Piers, uncharacteristically silent, his dominance slipping away. This was no longer just a debate about Meghan Markle. It was about accountability. It was about decency. It was about a man finally being held to his own standards. The tension thickened with every second. Susanna Reid, Piers's co-host, shifted nervously in her chair, her eyes flicking between the two men, knowing she was witnessing television history but also fearing where it might go next. The crew behind the cameras froze, unsure whether to intervene, to cut to commercial, or to let the drama play out. And at home, millions leaned closer to their screens, captivated, unable to look away. Then it happened. Piers's voice, sharp and defensive, sliced through the silence. Okay, I'm done with this. He pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the studio floor, the sound harsh and final. His face was flushed, his eyes blazing with a mix of anger and humiliation. I'm not having this. For a split second, the world held its breath. Was he bluffing? Was this another dramatic performance, a ploy for attention? But no, this was different. Piers Morgan, the man who had spent decades staring down politicians, celebrities, and royalty, was now storming off his own set, defeated not by a world leader, not by a scandal, but by the quiet, steady words of his colleague. The camera tracked him as he stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked out of the studio. His footsteps echoed like gunshots, each one marking the end of an era. Susanna Reid looked stunned. Alex Beresford looked both shaken and relieved. And the audience at home watched in disbelief as the unthinkable unfolded. This wasn't just television. This was a reckoning. As the door swung shut behind Piers, the studio sat in stunned silence. Alex, though visibly emotional, steadied himself. He hadn't come to humiliate Piers. He hadn't planned to trigger a walkout. He had simply spoken his truth. But sometimes the truth is too heavy for those who refuse to carry it. What Piers didn't realize as he stormed down those corridors, leaving behind his chair and his show, was that this walkout would follow him forever. It would become a defining the moment, not just of his career, but of the global conversation around truth, accountability, and the weight of words spoken on live television. And outside the studio, the reaction was instant. Twitter exploded. Clips of the walkout spread like wildfire across the globe. Headlines flashed. Piers Morgan storms off, Good Morning Britain set. Memes appeared within minutes. Commentators dissected every frame, and millions of voices roared with either triumph or outrage. For those who had long called out Piers's relentless attacks, it was a moment of vindication. For his supporters, it was a rallying cry. And for Piers himself, it was a fracture in the image he had worked so hard to build, the unshakable, unstoppable voice of British television. But the story wasn't over. Because a walkout is not just an exit, it's a spark. And sparks, when they fall on dry ground, ignite fires that cannot be controlled. The door closed behind him, but the sound never stopped echoing. For viewers at home, it was surreal. One of the most powerful voices on British television had just walked out, live, in front of millions. And in that silence, in that unfinished broadcast, a moment of television history was born. Inside the studio, Susanna Reid tried to steady the show. She shuffled her papers, her voice trembling ever so slightly as she said, Okay, that's unfortunate. Her professionalism carried the weight of the broadcast, but nothing could hide the shock. Alex Beresford sat still, the storm inside him finally released, his face a mixture of frustration, sadness, and quiet triumph. He hadn't wanted this, but he knew it had to happen. The truth has a way of pushing people to the edge, and Piers Morgan had just fallen off his butt. Outside, in the real world, the reaction was immediate and deafening. Within minutes, Twitter erupted. Clips of Piers storming out hit social media timelines like a bomb. Hashtags trended globally. Hashtag Piers Morgan, #GMB, hashtag walkout. Memes were born in seconds. Piers walking out of weddings, of football matches, of the royal palace. Screenshots of his red, furious face filled timelines with captions mocking the man who for years had mocked others, and yet for every person laughing there was another defending him. Freedom of speech, they said. He's the only one brave enough to say what others won't. The country was split, just as it had been after Meghan and Harry's interview. Only this time it wasn't a royal couple at the center of the storm, it was Piers himself. The media pounced. Newspapers plastered the moment across their front pages. The Sun called it the Great Walkout. The Guardian called it Piers' meltdown. International outlets joined in: CNN, the New York Times, Al Jazeera, dissecting the fallout of one of Britain's loudest voices suddenly going silent. The headlines weren't just about Meghan Markle anymore. They were about ego, accountability, and the crumbling facade of a man who prided himself on being unbreakable. Behind the scenes, the pressure mounted. ITV executives faced a tidal wave of complaints. More than 58,000, a record for AFCOM mental health charities, condemned Piers's words, warning of the damage his dismissal of Meghan's struggles could do to vulnerable viewers. Politicians weighed in. Celebrities joined the debate, and the question became unavoidable. Could Good Morning Britain keep him on air after this? Piers, meanwhile, was defiant. Storming out hadn't humbled him, it had enraged him, he told colleagues. He refused to apologize, refused to back down. "I'm allowed an opinion," he snapped. To him, this wasn't about Meghan Markle, or Alex Beresford, or mental health. This was about freedom, his freedom, and he wasn't going to let anyone take it away. But freedom comes at a cost. On March 9, 2021, just a day after the infamous walkout, ITV announced that Piers Morgan would be leaving Good Morning Britain. The words were short, clinical, but devastating. Following discussions with ITV, Piers Morgan has decided now is the time to leave Good Morning Britain. For some, it was a victory. Mental health advocates celebrated. Meghan's supporters cheered. Viewers who had long grown tired of his relentless attacks felt justice had been served. But for others, it was censorship, a silencing of a voice that dared to speak against the mainstream narrative. The debate raged, louder than ever, and in the middle of it all, Piers Morgan stood both destroyed and immortalized. The resignation only amplified the moment. Ratings soared in the short term as viewers tuned in to witness the fallout. Interviews with Alex Beresford went viral as he reflected on what had happened and why he felt he had to speak up. And Meghan and Harry, their names were once again in every headline, but this time, they weren't the ones on trial. Piers was. The irony was impossible to ignore. For years, Piers Morgan had built his brand on confrontation. He thrived in heated debates, prided himself on never backing down, never walking away. And yet, when challenged by someone who spoke with calm honesty rather than shouting rage, he cracked. The man who always demanded accountability from others had been undone by accountability directed at himself. Globally, the incident became more than a tabloid story. It became a cultural flashpoint. Commentators debated the boundaries of free speech. Universities discussed the role of the media in shaping narratives about mental health and race. Social activists pointed to Alex Beresford's words as an example of how speaking truth to power can change the conversation. And still, Piers refused to apologize. In interviews after his resignation, he doubled down, insisting he still didn't believe Meghan Markle, that he was punished for expressing his opinion. His supporters rallied behind him, calling him a martyr for free speech. His critics saw him as a bully finally confronted, finally exposed. But no matter which side you stood on, one fact was undeniable. The walkout had cemented itself as one of the most shocking live television moments of all time. A moment when power shifted, when truth punctured ego, and when the unstoppable force of Piers Morgan met the immovable calm of Alex Beresford, and the world would never forget it. History has a way of choosing its moments. Sometimes it's a grand speech, sometimes it's a war, and sometimes it's as simple as a man walking away from his chair. The day Piers Morgan stormed off the Good Morning Britain set, he didn't just leave a studio, he left behind a chapter of his career that would define him forever. In the days and weeks that followed, Britain couldn't stop talking about it. The walkout replayed on morning shows, late-night monologues, podcasts, and social media feeds. It wasn't just news, it was spectacle. And in the heart of that spectacle, two men stood, Piers Morgan and Alex Beresford. One had built a career on being loud, unrelenting, and confrontational. The other had built a reputation on being calm, measured, and almost invisible. But on that morning their roles shifted. The weather presenter became the storm, and the host became the man running for cover. For Piers, the consequences were immediate. He lost his chair, his platform, and the routine he had dominated for years. But in a strange twist, he didn't lose his relevance. If anything, the controversy made him bigger. His name trended worldwide. His departure sparked debates about cancel culture and free speech. And in the process, he carved out a new identity, not just as a broadcaster, but as a symbol. To some, he became the man silenced for daring to question Meghan Markle. To others, he was the bully finally called out and forced to face the consequences. But to truly understand the legacy of that moment, you have to look beyond Piers himself. You have to look at what Alex Beresford's words ignited. For years, Mental health had been a subject tucked in the shadows, whispered but rarely shouted. When Meghan spoke of feeling suicidal, it was a crack in the silence. And when Piers dismissed it, it was more than an opinion, it was a signal. To millions struggling quietly, it said, "Your pain doesn't matter." That's why Alex's response struck so deeply. He wasn't just defending Meghan, he was defending every person watching who had ever felt dismissed, ignored, or doubted. The legacy then is about more than television drama. It's about the power of words. One man's dismissal became another man's breaking point, and together they created a conversation far larger than either of them. The clip of Piers storming off wasn't just entertainment. It became a teaching tool, a discussion point, a symbol of how fragile even the most confident voices can be when confronted with truth. And yet, the paradox remains. Piers walked away, but he didn't vanish. In fact, he returned, louder than ever, joining new platforms, launching new shows, and continuing his crusade against what he called woke culture. The walkout didn't end him, it transformed him. He became a martyr to some, a villain to others, but to everyone, he became unforgettable. For Alex Beresford, the moment was quieter but no less powerful. He didn't become a celebrity overnight, nor did he try. But his words lingered. They echoed in schools, in offices, in homes. He showed that sometimes the most powerful blow isn't delivered with rage, but with composure. He didn't shout. He didn't insult. He simply told the truth. And that truth forced one of television's loudest voices into silence. Looking back now, the walkout feels almost cinematic. The build-up, the confrontation, the exit, it had all the beats of a story that could only be written by reality itself. And like all great stories, it leaves behind questions. What does it mean to have freedom of speech? Does it mean you can say anything, no matter the harm? Or does it mean you must also accept the consequences of those words? Piers Morgan's defenders argue that he was punished for honesty, for refusing to bend to a narrative he didn't believe. His critics argue that his honesty was cruelty, that freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from accountability. And somewhere in the middle lies the truth. He was both right and wrong, both victim and villain, both powerful and powerless. The legacy of that moment isn't just about a man storming offset. It's about a culture in transition, a world grappling with new rules about mental health, racism, and the responsibility of public voices. A world where one walkout can spark millions of conversations, where one confrontation can ripple across continents. And perhaps that's the real power of it all. Not the memes, not the headlines, not even the resignation. The real power lies in the shift it caused, the way it forced people to stop and think, to ask, what do we tolerate? What do we dismiss? And how do we hold those in power accountable? And the end, the story of Piers Morgan and Alex Beresford, isn't just about a TV meltdown. It's about the clash between ego and empathy, between noise and silence, between dismissal and belief. It's about two men who, for a few minutes on live television, embodied the battle playing out in living rooms around the world. And so the image remains. Piers Morgan, red-faced, pushing back his chair, walking away from a conversation he couldn't control. Alex Beresford, calm and steady, sitting in his chair, having spoken his truth. Two men, two choices, one unforgettable moment. History won't remember the weather forecast that day. It won't remember the other news stories on the rundown. But it will remember this. The morning when words became too heavy for one man to carry, and silence became louder than anything he had ever said. Because sometimes, the most shocking moment isn't in what is spoken. It's in the moment when someone chooses to walk away.